and welcome to Question Christianity, where we try to give tough questions about the Christian worldview reasonable answers. So that's what
our
we
goal.
do.
Yeah.
That's what we try to do.
All right, fair
I'm
enough.
Caleb Johnston,
Charles Graves.
and we usually have a couple more with us, but it looks like it may be just us for a few weeks.
Yep.
I got to change things up just a little bit, but
Thinning of the herd.
yeah, but
No,
we'll go from there.
It was involuntary on our part. They just they bad out. They had other things going on, so here we are.
We don't want to tell people that they turn liberal, do we? I mean, like full liberal Christians and have left.
Yeah, we had to dump them. We couldn't. Their theology was
they're
not
really. We're just messing around. So we are continuing with some questions that we had.
It's finally my night.
Weeks back. Yeah, finally, Charles. It took a while to come.
We thought
everybody bailed.
Just a little insight. We thought when we did the first episode, we're like, all right, we need to have like 3 or 4 questions, and maybe we'll need more if we don't get to an hour. We did 1, and so this is it's been an hour for each question, which I don't know if that means they're really good questions or we're just really bad at answering them.
Could be a little of both.
Okay. Right.
You never know, right?
So, are we ready? Is it? You want me to unveil my question? All right. So, and I think that the best questions are the ones that you don't know the answer to. So, I'm not going to say I don't have any opinion on this. I actually do have. I feel like I'm like 75% on this answer, but that said, it's a real nagging 25%. I'm just putting rough estimates on it. So I would very greatly. It's really a shame that the other guys aren't here. I really would value some pushing back. So I'm gonna play devil's advocate for most of this, and really let's see what Caleb has to say. So anyway, so the question is, well, I think it's probably in the show episode name, but should Christians turn the other cheek? And what exactly does that mean in the varying circumstances that we experience in this real broken world? So, let's start easier maybe and get harder. So, should Christians turn the other cheek?
Well, I mean, given the way it's presented, maybe we should look at that first.
Okay. Matthew, pretty sure that's Matthew. Ooh, dang.
Let's see.
I'm gonna go with. It's not 7. Is it 7?
We're gonna find out. Right?
It's the Sermon on the Mount for sure. So that's Matthew 5, 6, 7, 8. I should. Matthew. Oh, what am I doing? How about turn the other cheek? This is a video of us Googling stuff.
could be worse, right? Here
all right, turn the other cheek. Let's see. Someone else is probably screaming. It's Luke 6:29. See, I was right. It wasn't 7.
Yeah. So here we go. I'm reading out of the NET tonight.
Oh wait, 5. Wait, yeah. So wait.
Yeah. So
2 places. Okay.
Is
and Luke 6:29. Anyway, okay. You go ahead, please.
All right, so this is the Matthew passage.
And I'll tell you what, let's maybe read the context around it. You're probably going to do that anyway?
Yeah, so I'm going to read a few verses surrounding, and then just to give a little wider context, going by the headings of some of the paragraphs here. Of course, this is on the Sermon on the Mount. And at this time, he's answering questions on things such as anger, murder, adultery, divorce, and retaliation. And that's kind of where we're getting to here. After discussing oaths, in verse 38, we pick up and it says, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the evildoer, but whoever strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other to him as well. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your coat also. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to the one who asks of you, and do not reject the one who wants to borrow from you."
All right. Well, before we dive into a specific verse, let's try to tackle just what the thrust of that is saying. I'm just taking it back initially. The first verse, gosh, that one's so hard. Do not
Right.
resist the evil person. Man.
Right. And I mean,
then,
it's an interesting comparison here too, where it's clearly a parallel Jesus is drawing between the old law, as he mentions an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, this idea that was there within culture, that you replace exactly for what someone has done. They receive the exact penalty for that. If they take your eye, you take their eye. But he's flipping that on its head and saying that it's not even it's inferior to do that, I think.
Where is it where he says, be perfect, therefore, just as your heavenly Father is perfect? I want to, yeah, see, it's so close. 5:48. See, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So yeah, so let's finish out the chapter here. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those that persecute you, so that you may be like your Father in heaven, since he causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the evil and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Even the tax collectors do the same, don't they? And if you only greet your brothers, what more do you do? If you only greet your Even the tax collectors do the same, don't they? And if you only greet your brothers, what more do you do? Even the Gentiles do the same, don't they? So then be perfect as your heavenly Father
That's
is
it. What a
perfect.
summary of just the impossible standard of the Sermon on the Mount. Okay. I feel like the pit is getting deeper, not shallower here.
Right.
Well, okay, so all right, so he's saying, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the evil person. Is he then? I don't think he is, but is he throwing out the idea of justice altogether then? Should there be no resisting of evil persons ever?
I don't think that's indicated at all. I think it's more, again, focusing on that comparison between Old Testament law, and people's hearts had become very hard to that. So it had been hardened by the law. People did what was in the law and nothing more. It was no longer about the ideas and the moral obligations behind the laws. It was about the laws themselves taking on a life, rather than it being about the principles that are behind and guide those laws.
He says something along that lines when he's talking about divorce. It's like, hey, Moses gave you the divorce because why? Because you were hard of heart. I think that's pretty close to what he says.
Yeah, and here it's and it may be, I think, a reference to the same statement, but it was said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a legal document. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except for immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. No, you're thinking about when he's talking about Moses. Moses said to you, whoever is to divorce his wife must give her a certificate of divorce.
Yeah.
But I say to you, whoever looks on a woman with lust has committed adultery in his heart.
I'm Googling that one.
So again, it's showing this comparison, I think, between the Old Testament law and the New Covenant, and that it's not just about not doing wrong to people, but doing right even by those who don't deserve it in some means. It's the mercy side of the equation. Justice is there still, but this is the mercy piece, I think.
We're going to have a cumulative, solid, systematic theological standing here. Almost all heresies are taking one verse and clinging to it despite other verses that may clearly go against it, and kind of diminishing those and just focusing on one. So
right, and when you take this passage in that way, you see a lot of Christians will take this even to go so far as to push towards a pacifism.
yes, for sure.
And it all comes based largely just on this passage.
And I gotta sympathize with them, because these are some pretty clear words that say, do not resist the evil person. Right? There was eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. I'm telling you, don't do that. Turn the other cheek. If someone sues you, you just give it to them. Someone asks you to go 1 mile, you go 2, which is inference to the requirements of what the Romans used to. I think the Roman soldiers used to have to, or not have to, but could force civilians to just carry their stuff for a mile or something like that. So it's like, I'll go 2. You want 1? I'll go 2. That said, God is love, but he is also just. He's perfectly just. And there is a number of passages that we can quote. Romans 3 is one that just sticks in my head. So God is also just, but he is just. So, there's this very careful, and again, I'm not really answering. I'm struggling here, but he is the one that's to bring justice, right? And so Romans 12, then, at the end of Romans 12, where Paul actually quotes this verse, which I think Jesus is also quoting, do not resist the evil person. If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In this way, you will heap burning coals on his head. Or actually, before that, it says, do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for I will avenge. I will repay. That's God speaking. Okay, so fine. So he hasn't abandoned justice, but he is the one that will take justice. And so where does that leave me?
It's a good question. And then on top of that, you can throw in passages like Luke 22:36.
Okay.
I believe. Yeah, 36, which is quoted by a lot of American conservatives to support gun rights.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, and I want to get to that if we have time, because that's not to be dismissed either. And so again,
Right,
we're going
and
to
I
have to
think
have
it plays into this question too
right. We
of
have to have this
self-defense.
solid thing where we're taking all these into account, putting each in this place, and one of the reasons that you and I agree, like, you don't just read a verse. At the very least, you got to read a couple verses around. You want to get the thrust of what's trying to be said, instead of just plucking a verse out and taking it out of context. Because I don't want to do that. The whole reason I'm talking about this is because, very honestly, I want to make sure that I'm not just justifying what I want to do and playing that game either. I
Right.
do think I have somewhat of a pretty solid view on this, but 25% for me is a lot, and I need to be obedient to what my Lord says. So I need to figure that out, and I'm seeking wise counsel. Okay, so
I guess maybe a good place for us to go next would be what kind of lines are we looking at here, and then diving into some of the context behind maybe why that is, because I think what the question comes down to is where is the line with not only pacifism, but with self limitation to a certain degree. So, is a lot of people would say the line's probably at self defense. as being a solid place to draw kind of a line on this particular question. Others may put it further one way or another, or may say only certain situations. Where are you kind of where do your thoughts land on where the line kind of is on this particular issue?
Okay, so I'm going to use what I think is a good general biblical principle, and I think we've heard the saying, "the lesser of two evils." And I heard Greg Kokel speak on this one time, and I really like what he said. He said, "I don't like that phrase. I want to do the opposite. I want to do the greatest good that I can possibly do." And I like that. Maybe some people don't think it's the same thing, or it's the same thing. To me, it does. Like, what's the greatest good? That's just a good way of looking. I don't like, what's the less evil I can do here? It's like, what's the greatest good that I can possibly do here? In the light of biblical morality, right? So taking all of the Bible and God's morality as he's revealed himself, and he has revealed a lot about his morality. And so in those situations, all the complex real world situations, that I think what is the greatest good that I can do here is an appropriate way to do good, solid Christian decision making. Now, that doesn't mean we can just blow off verses. Matter of fact, we have to look at our verses and help them develop our moral thinking, right? Not Charles's moral thinking, Christ,
Right.
Christ's moral thinking. But some things, like, okay, so let's move from like the black and white areas and slowly try to converge on the grayest area. So the greatest good then, like what I think would be a pretty easy thing to make a call on would be if I was walking down the street and I saw anyone, but let's make it pretty crystal clear. If you saw a young woman getting brutalized and raped by a thug, right? Do not resist an evil person.
No.
Yeah, it's like, okay, what's the greatest good that I could do there? And I think ideally the greatest good that I could do is to stop the crime immediately, to the benefit of both the victim and the victimizer, right? Not
Right.
to maybe use that as an excuse, like, oh, okay, now I can finally shoot somebody. It's like, no, I want to do the greatest possible good I can do here. I want to try to stop the violence that's going on, and hopefully stop it in a way that will require the least amount of more violence,
Right.
right? So, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a better approach to seek the greater good in a given situation, because in seeking the lesser evil, I think sometimes we often make compromises. And I think we're too apt to do that in those situations. If we got ourselves by a principle such as, the lesser of the evils, then I think it allows us to personally compromise our own views as saying, you know what, I'm doing something slightly evil here, and maybe it's not as evil as I thought it was. Because that's how we post
Yeah, like kind of that
rationalize these things.
self-justifying.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So I think even from a psychological perspective, you could argue that it's somewhat damaging to take that response while looking for the greatest good to be done. Would be objectively harder to negatively impact in unintentional ways, I would think. You
Yeah.
still have that possibility.
Yeah.
You can't know all factors, but
Yeah. So, and then we can take a principle like that, which probably needs refinement, but we can at least start with it. And then let's hold that in one hand and say, okay, we're going to try to do the greatest good. All right, now let's look at what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, and let's see if those things collide, or if there's a way that maybe one sheds light on the other. So, do not resist an evil person. Okay, that seems like a blanket statement, but I'm not convinced that that is a end all like everything has to meet that criteria. I think that's a general principle that he then expands on. Okay, so turning the other cheek. And I think probably both of us have heard, but maybe some of our listeners hadn't. It's very interesting that it's that the hand, the right hand versus the left hand, is actually specifically listed there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because it's like it's a backhanding, it's kind of a descriptive of maybe somewhat of a culturally common thing of a backhanding thing. So no one likes to get slapped in the face, but
Right.
this isn't a bodily attack like life and death. This is someone
Right.
has insulted you, like, and and not just in a little way, like doing your mom joke, like they have backhanded you. What's the greatest possible good that I could do in that situation? I think if it's ending there, if it's a backhand, it's not like an initial, like the start of an initial assault, like, where someone's then coming at me with a knife. Like it's a backhand. It's horrible. It's a horrible attack on my pride.
Right.
Um, but maybe the best good I can do then is to turn the other cheek. It's like, all right, if you're going to hurl insults at me, then I will take them. Now, I heard someone say to that,
That makes sense.
um, that, and I really like the way this was put. If you can't be a good pacifist, you can't be a good pacifist unless you first have the strength to fight, because then it's not really, you're not choosing anything. You're just using that, you're weak, and so you're using your pacifism as a way to just be weak. Um, so I think that, again, I want to be really careful here, but that that turning the other cheek really has to come from a place of strength. I think it's like, you know what, uh, I have the strength and maybe even somewhere the will to resist you, but I'm choosing to not do that.
Right. Um, and that's often the much harder thing to do too.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think there's also another principle we could draw out of the scriptures too, that things may vary based on the situation and the information available. I think particularly in helping withdraw this line, I don't think we find. I think we find that the Old Testament supports the New in every way imaginable, and Exodus 22 verse 2 discusses about a thief breaking into your house and indicates that if they're caught breaking in and they're at night and they're struck and they're killed, then it's not considered bloodshed. However, if it happens during the day and they are struck and killed, it is considered bloodshed.
Mm.
So this is quite a bit different than kind of the stance that many Americans, I think, would take in saying that, if somebody comes into your house at any point, you have a right to defend yourself, and even many states have laws that allow you to end that person's life if they are in your home for ill intentions. Here, I think, there's certainly something to be said that in these cases where someone, where it was daylight, where maybe there was a chance to get help from authorities or other members in the community, or you just had more information, so you see that your attacker doesn't have a weapon.
It's a very interesting distinction you're making there. When you said you might have the right, I really thought, man, that's interesting, because just because you have the right to do something, I'm not trying to, I'm not talking about rights right here,
Mm-hmm.
right? My stance on what you might have the right to do is going to differ, actually, than what I think would be the right thing to do.
Right.
So you might have the right to do something. Doesn't mean, so just because you have the right doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. See, clever words. All right. So I have at least for now the freedom of speech, right? But that doesn't mean because I have the right to go say pretty much whatever I want, that saying there's a lot of things that would be not right for me to say. Okay. So I might have the right to defend myself, but it might not always be the right thing to do. Someone lends money from me and they don't pay it back. What is my right and what might be the right thing to do?
Right. So your
Maybe
right
two
would
different
be
things.
to demand that money back through whatever means you had to at that point.
And
But
gosh, we should actually go into that, because what did that
yes,
mean back in that culture? If you were in debt,
right. You were in service to someone. You
yeah.
were you were a servant to them until that debt was repaid.
hmm Or you could get thrown into debtor's prison, which good luck making money while you're in prison. That was kind of a weird thing, but you're just kind of stuck. So it was
Right.
kind of a a very harsh thing, that, or there were measures available to you that could be pretty harsh. So that's maybe what your right was, but what's the greatest good that you could do? Well, not borrow money from that guy again. Or
Yeah,
let that,
true.
sorry, not let that guy borrow. But it's like maybe the greatest good that I could do is to not not have him thrown in jail, not have him become my servant, and just forgive the debt. Um, maybe. But again, see, I still think that comes. I still think that comes from a position of strength. Let me tell you why. Another thought that I'll just throw in here. I was really taken aback not too long ago when I learned what the original meaning of the word meek meant. And I think that we have almost entirely lost the biblical sense of that word. And so it's a Greek word. It was borrowed and used. So we have to understand, if someone used the word meek back in the first century, they were borrowing this term that had a meaning back then. And I don't think it's the same meaning that we have now. And we need to know what that meaning was, because Jesus said, the meek shall inherit the earth. It's like, okay, what? It's not weak. He didn't say weak. He could have said weak. That word is available. It was there. He didn't use it. It's interesting. It's not the same thing. Meek is not weak. So what does meek mean? And gosh, this is just it's fascinating. It was a term used to describe the training of war horses. So they take these huge wild stallions, um, maybe not stallions, but they take these huge wild horses, and they'd select like the biggest, strongest ones to be used in military service. And then they would train those things. They would train them until they were highly trained, highly able, and they would like turn at the slightest indication of their rider. Right, the rider would say like go, and they would flip and go, and they would charge fearlessly into battle. And if the rider said stop, then it's like they would halt on a dime. Right, and at that point, when these horses were strong, trained, and absolutely obedient, they were called meek. Now, what does that mean for me? That's a really interesting thing, because what that means is I'm not supposed to be weak. I'm supposed to have a strength, right? And I'm supposed to be absolutely obedient. So this strength, the thing about those I love this idea. The thing about those war horses, they were incredibly strong and powerful, and had zero input on how that was to be used. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
yep, you're super strong, and that's only going to be used exactly how I tell you to be used. It's like, and those are the people that Christ said will inherit the earth. It's like, okay, I need to be strong, but I don't get to use that at all under my own authority. It's like I only use that where I'm supposed to use that.
Right.
Okay. So, so someone slaps me on the cheek. Okay. I'm supposed to be meek. Well, I'm going to I know what I want to do. Uh, maybe depending
Right.
on the
Right.
size of the other guy. um, but what I want to do doesn't matter, right? I'm supposed to be meek, and well, I've been told you're going to turn the other cheek. Roger that. I'm going to flip and turn the other cheek. Don't like it. It hurts me, but who cares what I think? I'm flipping meek. But it's got to come from this position of strength. So it's not a cowering. It's not a weakness. There's. I think there's something very. I'm. I find very attractive in a non sexual way, that there's something very attractive about someone who has a strength, but chooses to just, like, stand firm in a peaceful way, not someone who's cowering. That's it's a totally different picture. Two people that are unwilling to fight, and there is a totally different picture between one who's cowering away and looking for any excuse to not stand up. Like, it doesn't matter what the situation was, that guy's running, right? So when he would be told to stand firm and maybe to demonstrate his strength, he ain't got none.
Right.
Between the other guy who is strong, and it's like, man, and those stories really resonate. I think we've all heard stories of like big, huge guys, and or whatever, strong, powerful in the right way, powerful men who you just go, wow, that guy could have taken that guy out, and he just didn't. It's like, man, the other guy didn't know. I mean, someone's like some martial arts master, and someone at the bar like pours a drink on him and insults him. It's like, man, if you only knew who that was. And they never know, because in their strength they say, you know what, I'm whatever, yeah,
Right.
I'm going to turn
Right.
the other cheek. There's something very attractive about that. There's something inspiring about that, and it's absolutely the opposite. There's something so uninspiring about someone who's coming from a place of weakness, just like cowering away from everything. Who wants that?
Right. And you think about it, in an ideal world, that's the only kind of power that would exist to a certain extent, would be
Mm,
power that doesn't have to be exercised, because the I think my train of thought derailed there.
all right. While you think about that, so let's go back to, where was it, Luke 22:36.
Right. Right.
All right, so, oh man, you and I had talked before. We're like, well, let's just talk for 5 minutes and see how far it goes. And I'm thinking now, let's do like an 8-part series on
I,
this.
I know, right? You really could, if you wanted to. You could stretch this out and discuss every
Because
possible
it's
angle.
I mean, we live in a real broken world. So there's just so many situations, and I can't be the only guy that's struggling, going, I mean, one of the places that I eventually want to get to, and maybe we just don't get there tonight, but one of the places I eventually want to get to is, should I be carrying a firearm, a concealed firearm, for personal defense? And if so, if that turns out to be true, then under what situations should I use that? Like, if someone is not just insulting me, but if someone is, let's just say it gets more complicated. My wife's there, and okay, so there's someone I need to defend. If it's just me and someone's coming after me, and my genuine belief is they are coming to kill me. Believe it or not, I mean, I'm pretty pro Second Amendment, and I do carry a firearm, most of the time. If my wife is there, it's a different story. Someone else is there. If it was just me, I I don't actually know what the right thing to do is in that situation. And I know some people that are maybe totally pro Second Amendment. I'm not, and by the way, I'm just saying me. Like, this is me. I would, if someone else saved their life, I would find that absolutely justified. But man, what's the greatest good that I can do in that situation? I don't know that that's really crystal clear in my head, for me personally.
Right. I think I think it becomes very convoluted for me too, especially in regards to the Second Amendment, because there are certain things that I don't think we often consider as a society. And so, I throw this out there, and I want to say, a trigger warning to people. I'm going to discuss suicide a little bit
Mm.
as a topic here. So, I'm throwing that out just as a warning to people that's going to, if that triggers anybody in ways that are not good for your mental health, please, we might want to tune out for a few minutes. So suicide is largely an impulse decision. Back in, I believe it was London, where there were some studies done back in the 30s, 40s.
Talking about
The
people using gas, right?
Yes, gas
Yeah.
ovens was one of the greatest hazards. That that's what was available that people used and to take their own lives.
Mhm.
So they tried to get rid of gas ovens, and they largely eliminated them. It didn't completely fix the suicide rate, but it did help reduce things significantly. So a question is, one of the most prevalent methods of suicide in the U.S. is firearms. So we also have the question, is it of the greatest good to restrict use or to eliminate, public use, if it were to save people from themselves in these impulseful decisions often made? So I think when we look at greater good, that's something else that must be considered. Is it in the best of a society to have firearms in the hands of their citizens? I think it's
Okay.
an
Well,
important question. I probably fall probably pretty close to where you do, Charles, but
no,
I
I
think
don't know.
that's I
I'm
think
gonna
that's a hard
disagree
one.
a lot. Well, okay, I'll give you my rebuttal to that, but then I'll give you the final word.
Okay.
Um, so I'm aware of what you said. Matter of fact, to steelman your argument, one of the things that I believe was true about that was, and well, you did mention it, but when they started transitioning off the natural gas and suicide went down, and there was something culturally significant once kind of like the first couple people did it about putting your head in an oven, and gosh, it's horrible that it is, but and so it was like this cultural thing, and so once that cultural trigger, to for lack of a better word, that cultural symbol was removed, then like suicide rate went down. It's like, well, I can't put my head in the oven, so maybe I just won't commit suicide, which is kind of weird, but that's just kind of, I guess, how people are. Okay, so right, fair enough. Am I
Yeah,
giving the
absolutely.
your point? It's fair point. So okay, that said, the two big reservations I'd have about doing the same type of things with firearms um, would fall along two general prongs. I won't go into them in depth, but I'll just kind of say like these are the two main areas that I would have serious reservations about that. One is, and I think they both would stand. So I'd really, I'm gonna have a problem with this either way. Okay, number one, if you could remove all firearms and eliminate all deaths by suicide by firearms, and you could be sure that they didn't then transition, because there's no being assured of that, but it's certainly possible, right? I get it. So it's certainly possible that it could have the same. We don't know that for sure, but it could have the same tie. We don't know it, and
Right.
so that's a very interesting thing that we want to be very careful that we're doing things. But anyway, you would have to also, so let's say we saved X amount of lives by doing that. I would want to ensure that the amount of lives that are saved by proactive use of firearms didn't also go down even more. So
Right.
we're
Right. Of
saving
course.
X, make sure that because there are, I mean, some reports are, I don't have the number, so I don't want to quote it, but it's extremely high of the proactive use of firearms to protect citizens who truly believe that their life was going to be in danger. And by the way, most of those don't require firing the firearm. That's interesting. It's merely brandishing. So it's like you're, like, say, dark alley scenario, someone comes at you and you're like, hey man, I got a gun, so get away from me. And they do. Those don't get reported because what are you going to file a report? Maybe some people do, but a lot of times like, wow, that was weird, and you just kind of like shrug it off and you don't go down to
Right.
the police station. Anyway, so you got to make sure that the lowering doesn't result in a greater amount of violent crime. So
Absolutely.
okay, so that's one thing. The other thing was, even if you could and say, look, we're going to we're going to lower the amount of suicides, and the number of violent crimes is actually not, it's going to go up, but not as much, so we're going to actually save more lives. If that was the case, if there is because some people are misusing things, I don't know that that gives you the right to take away the legitimate use of someone else. So if someone has taken their car and, well, okay, how about this? There used to be, until like the catalytic converter came along, people used to routinely kill themselves in garages with cars.
Hmm.
right? And that was kind of like a cultural thing. Like I remember growing up, like I'd hear about that from time to time on the news. I never knew anyone personally. Okay, does that mean then that we could save, if we could save so many people, um, we should then get rid of cars? Now I know this isn't a one for one, but it's like, well, my right to drive should not be based on someone else's misuse of this piece of technology, right? And the amount, okay, and then also the amount of good that could become. So I think people should have, okay, back to right and the right thing to do. I think people have the right to defend themselves. Like I'm again, I'm struggling personally with what I might do in some scenarios, but I am very much supporting people's right. Like someone, again, if someone else defended their life, I would, if it was a justified shooting, so to speak, I would be absolutely in support. It's like that guy was coming after you, you absolutely had the right to do that. And I wouldn't even question like, well, maybe you should have taken one, for the team. Like maybe you should have died. No, I wouldn't be like that. But again, I'm trying to be like I'm trying to grow in my spirituality, right? And so if it's just me, like what is the greater good? Some people might say the greater good is that the criminal, if one of us is going to die, if that was the scenario, it's like either him or me. If, let's just say it's black and white like that. The greater good is that the criminal will die, not the innocent person. And there's a really valid point to that. But if I'm a follower of Christ, maybe the greatest good is that I'm going to die and then I will go to
Hmm.
heaven and be with my Savior. And maybe this criminal, maybe God has a plan of salvation for this person. They get another day and they see, and like perhaps in the dream scenario, they realize that I had a gun. This is after I'm dead. They kill me and they're like, oh, that guy could have shot me, but he chose not to. Wow, like why would someone choose to die for this criminal? Because that's the gospel. That's what Christ did for us. And so maybe in modeling that, so that's, it's not that I don't have the right. I think I would absolutely have the right. It's like, man, what, and then the other thing that haunts me, and I think we're going to just end up and asking more questions than we're going to answer here. I'm also taken aback by the acts of the early church and what they voluntarily, like uh, many believers voluntarily went into the Colosseums. Like
Hmm.
they some obviously involuntarily went, some voluntarily went. It's like, I'll go. Wow, what? Like what? Just to demonstrate God's love for the world. So I'm trying to struggle with what would be the greatest good in some really broken and hard places.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting too that I think we see Christ really exemplify this.
Right, right.
Following this, when Judas returns and he is being arrested, and
Mhm,
we see Peter rip out his sword, slash off the guy's ear,
mhm.
and then Jesus heals it. He just told him a little while before to go and sell your cloak and buy a sword. Here comes the time for battle.
Ah,
The
but see, I don't think that
disciples
was.
see.
But see, I
I
don't
think
think
the
it was.
disciples see it that
Yeah,
way,
right. They
probably.
said, "Oh,
Yeah,
maybe this is why." But yeah, I think there was a time, but this wasn't it. And then it's
right.
like,
But
and
again, who knows how many times just having that sword could have protected them from conflicts that could have come up minorly.
yeah,
As you said, from a position of
yes,
power. I think
yeah,
there's something to be said for that. Jesus came from a position of power. He even demonstrates it in a
mhm,
positive way there at his
mhm,
arrest,
mhm,
and
mhm.
yet he allows himself to be
Yeah.
arrested
If you're
anyway.
really the Son of God, why don't you take yourself down from that cross? No, actually, because I'm the Son of God, I'm going to stay right here.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
wow. Um, there's
that's
something.
ultimate meekness.
Yeah, right. Wow. Correct. I never thought about that. Yeah. Obedient to his Father. Like,
Yeah,
who was more obedient to the Father than Christ?
no
Zero,
one.
zero people. Nobody. Totally obedient. Um, so yeah, the whole thing about that, the Last Supper and the arrest, I find that also intriguing as kind of the other side, which is again just it's like it's like this two different things struggling. It's like, okay, yep. There was a time when he said, go out, don't take any money, don't take a sword. Go out, and you just need to understand that I'm actually in charge here, and that basically, naked and afraid, you can go out, and my will be done. And they came back and they're like, "Yep, you're right. That was amazing." But then he says, "Go away, go, go, go." Then he says, "Sorry, Tukey." But now at the Last Supper, it's like, sell your cloak, because times are going to get hard, and I'm going to go, and you're going to be on your own for a while, and so you're going to need to be able to defend yourself, which is interesting. That's interesting. Not exactly clear how that's going to work, but he does actually say, "Sell your cloak and buy a sword." Okay, and they say, what's even more interesting? They go, "How about these two right here?" It's like, that'll do. That's enough. What were they doing with swords on them at the time? Like, where did those come from? You know, they had just gone through the whole dinner. They came in. They apparently at least two had swords on them the entire time during the dinner. What was said about that? Nothing, except for when they whipped it out. They're like, "Well, we actually have some right now." Okay, good. That's enough. Two's enough. It's also interesting that say that's enough, not like, no, you need to have like two apiece. So okay, but so they have it
Right.
at
I
the
mean,
Last Supper.
12 people with two swords are not going to win very many battles, especially when it comes to the Roman government.
Yeah, right, right. Okay, fair enough. So it's like, have some. Does that mean not everyone gets one? I wouldn't go that far. I think it's interesting. Then what happens next? After the Last Supper, then Jesus goes to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray. Okay, and there's that. And then the arrest comes, and lo and behold, Peter has a sword on him, which means he had it the whole time. He had it during dinner, he had it during the garden, and he had it at the rest. Like, the whole time Peter's carrying a sword. The whole time. And nothing negative said. Like, "Peter, what the heck are you doing with that thing during dinner? Like, put that away." Nope. At the Garden of Gethsemane, why do you still have your sword? "Oh, it's because I told you to carry one." "Oh, okay." And then the arrest comes, and then Peter whips it out. Now, some might say, look, at those who live by the sword die by the sword. The last time Peter interfered with Christ going to the cross, that didn't go so well for him, right? It's like,
Right.
"No, Lord, you'll never," right? So on the mount, "No, Lord, never. Get behind me, Satan." Like,
Mm-hmm.
so I think all this stuff's got to be taken into this very complex context. Like, yeah, sword, not now. I'm trying to go to the cross and save the entire humanity. Don't get in my way of doing this. And by the way, you got two swords, and there are potentially, I've heard, hundreds maybe there. You got the guard, you got pitchforks and knives and, sharp sticks, whatever. There's a whole bunch of people there. If you whip that thing out now, you're gonna die by that thing right now, because you're
Mm-hmm.
outmatched, and I'm not getting in the way, because I'm not getting in the way of them arresting me. So if you do this on your own power,
Yeah.
you're gonna die. You're gonna die by that thing right now, and it's not the time. So put that flipping back. And matter of fact, I'm gonna heal this guy's ear, because I'm meek. I'm the Son of Man. Okay, so those are kind of like the bookmarks. I got the beginning of Matthew, and then I got the arrest. So there's the Sermon on the Mount, and then there's that, go buy a sword and use it wisely. I I'm stuck, man.
Yeah, I wonder, I'm torn on the passage myself as to whether it may not be a reference to the spiritual war that's coming, in that
Mm,
things are getting ready to shift, because with
mm,
Jesus's resurrection, uh, the battle really has been won, and the whole shift goes from a nation to a people being built up and reclaiming spiritual land. I mean, in a sense, each believer is reclaimed land from enemy forces.
mm,
I also think it's, in my own view, I think it's extremely important that we look at, who Paul indicates the enemy is. We're never told people are the enemy. by Jesus. We're told that spiritual forces are by Paul, by Jesus. It's the spiritual forces that are our true enemy. It's not our fellow human beings. Doesn't mean we're never going to have to act out against another human being, but it certainly means that we have to try to do best for them, even if it costs us something.
Yeah.
And I think that's the harder thing, even beyond just, having a solid view on self-defense. It's a question of am I willing to live my life in such a way that I'm willing to give of strangers pieces of me, of my time, of my resources in such a way that I won't ever get them back. I may never be repaid for that slap on the other cheek. I may never get that sorry. I may never get that borrowed money back. But am I willing to live my life in such a way that I'm willing to give it up for others
Willing. See,
piece
that's
by
willing.
piece?
Yeah. Like I want to do this. There's that.
Right, right.
I've always been haunted. There's a comment that Luther makes in the beginning of his commentary on Romans. It just slew me, Caleb, when I first read it. But he said, if I'm going to paraphrase this, but he said, if you're doing what you think is right, it's like the right thing to do, and you're doing it, but you don't want to do it, like it's not in your heart, then really you've just substituted the act for hypocrisy and lies. I thought you can't get it. In other words, you might do it, but you're doing it from hypocrisy. You don't want to do it, and so it's just hypocrisy and lies. So you're just doing it to do it, but you don't want to do it. And so what does that mean? And so someone's going to say, well, what the heck am I supposed to do? And the answer is, you can't do anything to earn salvation, right? So it's either you do something you don't want to do out of hypocrisy and lies, or you don't do what you're supposed to do, and so then you're just disobedient. So you can't win, and that's true. You can't win. You're not going to win the works salvation game, which is why it's such a wonderful comment at the beginning of Romans. Like you're all guilty, and even if you were to act perfectly, you can't do it because then you're doing it from hypocrisy and lies. That said, we're not saying that you shouldn't do good things, but I think the whole reason I bring that up is, gosh, it's just you, you I think we're dependent and involved with our sanctification and depending on God to bring us to a point where, gosh, not like who could do this on their own? Who could do this without the Holy Spirit? Where you would want to sacrifice for the benefit of someone else. Like that would be like something that costs you dearly, would be something that genuinely in your heart is something you want to do to glorify God and for the benefit of someone else at great cost to yourself. Like God, who can beat that? Right?
Right,
That's
right.
true Christian discipleship. Like that's the black belt level, I think. And I don't even want to say it like that. Actually, that's not a good, because it's got to be a work of the Holy Spirit. Like that's the rebirth. That's my prayer for me and us all. Like, Lord, grow me to the place where I enjoy serving you at great cost to myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good luck doing that on
Absolutely.
your own.
You know,
So
I heard addiction recently described as now I'm going to forget the quote. I'll have to look it up. But yeah, basically, it's a slow suicide. You're killing yourself slowly through addiction. Um, as Christians, I think the Christian worldview offers an alternative of dying for another life. That sanctification process. It's not that doing stuff. It's not that doing good is going to earn you one bit of righteousness. But I think doing those things and moving towards an emulation of Christ, what it does is it reshapes us. It lets us die to this world in preparation for what I believe the next one is. Yeah,
That sounds like
if
pretty
I
good.
can be more like Jesus, in after this life, that's what I want.
Yeah,
That's
and
exactly what I want.
yeah, I actually truly that there's definitely a regenerate part of me that looks forward to genuinely being absolutely humbled, like
Mhm.
to where you're just you all of your pride is just taken away from you. To me, that just sounds so freeing. It's like, oh, finally,
Yeah.
it's not about me at all anymore. Like all that is just removed. That sinful, prideful desire is just removed. That sacrificial serving would be just an absolute joy. They're just bowing down to unregenerate Christians. This is going to sound like crazy talk. I get it. This is not going to make any sense to an unbeliever. But the idea of just bowing down before God in absolute humility and humbleness, it just sounds so refreshing. It sounds, oh, that sounds great. Um, and I don't know. I think some believers have gotten pretty close to that here. Those are those remarkable stories of meekness. It's like, yeah, wow, look at that guy.
Right.
So, okay. Well,
So
we didn't answer my
where does
question.
all this leave us on turning the other cheek?
Yeah, I don't know. You're supposed to tell me. I think it's. I mean,
For me, I think the use of physical violence, as you stated, I would reserve that kind of thing
what
for
are you doing? Let me put you on the spot. Dark
every.
alley.
Yeah.
You're just you, just you and a bad guy. You've got a gun. He. Maybe you just saw him kill someone else, right? So too late. Can't help that guy. And now he's coming after you with the same knife, right? With with the look of determination and death, and he's coming after you. Um, and you can't run. You're at the back alley, like you're stuck. This guy's. What do you do, Caleb? Caleb Johnson, you personally.
That's a hard one. I honestly I don't know. I've been in one similar situation before. I like to think that if it were escalated more, I'd be able to react the same way I did there. But I would like to think that at the very least, I would be able to make an effort to non-violently resolve the situation, even if that put my life at greater risk.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. Okay, I'm gonna let you have the last word because I don't. I mean, I got some things that maybe I'd try, but I don't know that they're worthy to bring up. Maybe my last word would be just again I want to very clearly make the distinction that I think there are certain rights that we do have and we should have,
Hmm.
and I'm not talking about those at all. Like this, just for clarity, that's not what this is. Most well, we did touch on a little bit, but that's not my question. My question is not what should I have the right to do
Right.
at all. That's an absolutely different context. I'm struggling with what would be the best thing I could possibly do in the worst possible situation. Um, gosh, there were so many Christian martyrs.
Hmm. And yet we can't deny the good people do in situations where they stop someone from committing greater
For sure.
violence.
Yeah.
Everyone
Right.
recognizes
Yep.
that's a heroic act,
Yep.
whether you use a weapon or not.
Now, if there's I'm telling like that one is not 75-25 in my mind. That's like
Right, right.
100%. If there is a victim, I'm and a victimizer, I'm going to as peacefully as I can, but willing to use lethal force if I absolutely have to. And like last resort, yes, I would use lethal force to prevent someone else, and it doesn't have to be female. Like any if I knew that's innocent being victimized, I would stop that at whatever cost that took. That one's pretty clear. It's just because again, the question is not to be self-centered. The question is about me.
Hmm.
How can I, as a disciple of Christ, what is the greatest good that I can possibly do? Like, am I okay? I'm not willing to sacrifice someone else's life. I'm going to try to save an innocent, but this is my life. Well, actually, it's Christ, and so, gosh, what am I growing to the point where maybe the greatest good I could do is to sacrifice my life for a criminal? I don't know.
Or
I would.
to at least be willing to lay it down.
Oh, that's a good. You know what? I like that. At least be willing, potentially willing. How's that? That's as far as I can go. Potentially willing.
Yeah, I honestly think that's probably about as far as I can go, because you never know for sure. We could get into hypotheticals all night,
Mhm.
but you never know for sure given the situation. But that's what I pray for myself, is that I'm at least willing to consider that in any given situation.
All right. Let's give it another 10, 20 years of sanctification, and then maybe I'll have an answer.
Let's hope. All right, everybody. Thank you if you tuned in tonight. If you have questions you'd like to see kind of discussed, please drop them in chat. Otherwise, we will see you back here next time we do this for another Question Christianity.
Mm, mm.
Have a good night.